So for the interdisciplinary project between English and history, we're each going to maybe come up with one essential question for each of our classes, and maybe some skills and terms we've used or a project idea. And we could put some of the handouts here and just point out some things we want to discuss, and then eventually we could come up with a project. So how does culture shape the way we see ourselves and the world around us was the one essential question I was thinking of first. One of the things we want to think about for our students is how do we define culture for them according to their own lives. So having them fill out this handout here gets them thinking about culture outside of things just like dress or foods, but more along the lines of what's fair in our culture, how do we feel about time, things that aren't as obvious to them. And then after they finish that last worksheet, then they can also think about, even though everyone has a culture, we all sort of do things differently within our own homes possibly. So, for instance, within my class, I have some students that still, have Spanish-speaking parents at home. And they might have different holidays or ceremonies amongst each other, even though we are living in American culture. So this one is more individual and gives the understanding that not all people in every culture are the same.
So in order to demonstrate the interdisciplinary nature of what Tania was doing, Tania was covering this in her English class, and I'm going to be looking at it in my my world history class. So in this slide number 4, we want to take a look at the basic elements of culture. So we have the culture in the center, and this gives us the opportunity to study all cultures and place each culture and compare it apples to apples, so to speak. So if we look at the same aspects, the same elements of each culture, and then we can compare them basically straight up. So the major major components would be the education, the social organizations, the laws, politics, the aesthetics, certainly language, what religions and what values that they have. And this gives us an opportunity to look at those things. And whatever culture that we chose, we'd be able to look at their educational system, we'd be able to look at their language or multiple languages, religions, or multiple religions existing within the country, what their social organizations like, and essentially what they value and whatnot. So this gives us a baseline. It's one of the things that I begin to introduce with this study of culture. Okay, then for a more visual representation, we have this concept of that has been developed by numerous people of looking at culture as if it were an iceberg. Now we know that an iceberg floats down through the off the coast of Greenland after it calves off of the glaciers. And as it comes down, as we see it, we see 1/10. We see 1/10 of an iceberg. 9/10 of an iceberg is underwater. Well, so too with culture. There are things that we can visually see, the age of a person, perhaps the gender of a person, or the ethnicity of a person, what physical characteristics they might have, how they might dress. But it's really very, very difficult to see things down the bottom of the iceberg, for instance. How do they socially interact? What are their child rearing practices? What does that facial expression mean? You have perceptions of what they might believe about health or mental health or illness and disability. You're not going to get that from looking at a person. So if we're going to study culture, we study what we see, but then we also study what we can see, and we go beyond that by investigating, observation, interview, to take a good look at the depths of what exists in the culture. Oftentimes, a lot of times, Americans and others don't do this when we look at other cultures. We kind of look at what we see, and we make judgments about what we see without ever peeling, so to speak, down below or venturing down below into the deep waters of the iceberg to understand that. As I mentioned in the previous slide referencing the iceberg, another very good visual analogy is to take a look at an onion, and how an onion, there are layers to the onion, and you peel away the layers, each layer, and when those layers represent aspects of culture, we get down to the middle of the onion where we understand and we respect the ultimate allegiance of that person to that culture, you know. We can start out with different things like what are behaviors, but those behaviors are reinforced by feelings, and those feelings come from values, and those values come from beliefs within the culture. And if we establish ourselves by slowly looking at aspects of culture from both sides, from artifacts into beliefs, and from what we collect to what is real about a culture, we'll get a much, much, much deeper and clearer understanding about culture. Obviously, represented through these three previous slides, you know, there's a lot to this. There's a lot that kids can look at and the kids can use with respect to understanding not only our own culture, but cultures, foreign cultures and cultures from other regions of the world. And it makes us, as it indicates in this slide, develop more of a worldview as opposed to just our ethnocentricity and looking at ourselves. We need to figure out ourselves in this collaborative world, in this global world, this global economy, what those cultures are, in those values, those beliefs, what's true, what's good about other cultures, so that we can then engage with them in commerce or in politics or in the development of maybe us becoming world citizens as opposed to citizens of our country.